Hi, this is Curt and welcome to another edition of Fire Law Roundup.
Case last night. It's a case out of Michigan. Bill, did you have a chance to look at it?
I did. I was only able to skim the complaint, but I got the gist of it.
Yeah, and an interesting claim here. Now, we have a fire chief who apparently he received a complaint about from a female about sexual harassment. He didn't do it the way I recommend it be done, but he handled it in accordance with his department's way of handling it, which is fine. I mean, you don't have to do it. I recommend you do it the professional standards way. Bill, I know as a former police officer, you know the way that a police department would handle a complaint like that. And you know, you assign it to a professional standards investigator, formal investigation, and so on and so forth, or you refer it to HR, however. But he had a battalion chief handle it, and the battalion chief felt like he handled it, and apparently she felt like he hadn't. A second complaint came in. He assigned the same BC, and it's a little unclear what happened after that, but the bottom line is she ends up going to the town manager. The town manager is upset about the way that the chief handled it. It appears the town manager had some bad information, whether she told them that the chief didn't do anything, or he assumed the chief didn't do anything. But in fact, the chief had done something. And they launched this investigation, which the chief alleges was unfair. And at the end of the investigation, he ends up getting terminated. And so he's filed suit now, claiming that he didn't have a right to a hearing. He's claiming a liberty interest under due process. He's also seeking a mandamus, which is a court order to rectify some sort of an administrative decision that should have been made in a certain way. And he's claiming that that decision on his discipline was made improperly, and he wants to have a court review it. So, well, Bill, what was your sense from reading it?
My read on it is that the chief did what he was supposed to do.
Right.
I thought the complaint was very well drafted. I just wasn't able to read it in great detail. It's rather lengthy, but it seems to me that the municipality's approach to this was perhaps not as well thought through as it should have been. They're meeting with an employee in a coffee shop or a diner. It just kind of screams impropriety. Why aren't we meeting in City Hall or in headquarters or wherever? Why are we going outside the chain of command, et cetera, et cetera? I didn't see a request to go outside the chain of command in there. I thought what the chief did was, and of course, as we always say, we only know one side of the story here. It looked to me like he proceeded in the proper way. It's his right to delegate it. Perhaps the battalion chief is closer to the situation, knows more about it, knows the people involved. To me, it seemed perfectly reasonable what he did. And it didn't seem that the chief was given an opportunity to say, well, this is what I did.
Yeah, and he did at some point, he did present his evidence that he had done an investigation and he had a report and all that. And the person who was assigned to investigate it was very, I guess, surprised, because he must have been briefed by the town manager that the chief hadn't investigated it. So there was a little bit of a surprise and shock that, oh, you mean you did investigate it? And oh, you did document it? And so there was some questions there. But I think when we take a step back, the chief is an at-will employee, and that much is pretty clear. And so if they had to find cause, I think they'd have a problem. I think the township would have a problem. But because he's at will, he doesn't have a right to only be terminated for just cause. So even if he did the right thing, he doesn't really have a right to just cause. So I think that's going to be problem number one for him. And the second part of it is the mandamus. The mandamus is he's got to establish that they had a legal duty to make a certain decision, and they screwed up that decision. I'm not sure he's going to be able to make it on those. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the chief. I think the chief did do what he was supposed to do, at least according to his training and his SOPs. I just don't know if he's going to get a remedy, in court.
I didn't understand the bringing in of a private investigator into this. Why is this not investigated?
It's fairly common.
Is it really?
Oh yeah, it's for fire. Now, police, you never do that. You don't need to because you have trained investigators. But in fire departments, yeah, there's a lot of people, and I'm not one of them. There's a lot of people out there that recommend that a fire department always bring in outside investigators. And I get it. I have one son that was a firefighter. He's now gone on. He's a doctor now. But I have another son that's a police officer. But my son that was going to be a firefighter, he never crossed his radar screen that at some point he may have to do an investigation. It just wasn't what he was thinking of. Whereas my son that was a police officer, from when he decided he wanted to be a police officer and he went to criminal college to get his degree in criminal justice, he knew he was going to have to do investigations. And just that thinking about the whole skill set that you develop to do investigations, most firefighters don't have that. So I think we've got to develop that capability if we don't want to be investigated by outsiders. I guess that's how I look at it.
As I read the account of the investigation in the complaint, what jumped off the page at me was, this is not how you do an investigation.
Correct.
At least not in my world.
Well, there's two now. Because I can find fault with both of them. You had the investigation the fire department did, and then you had the investigation of the fire chief
from the city.
By the city, yeah. So which one did you?
The investigation by the city against the fire
of the chief.
To me was very unusual in its approach.
Predetermined, I think. Predetermined was the term that the chief referred to it as.
In the police department, we called it a witch hunt.
Yeah, as lawyers, we call it witch hunts too. But he referred to it as a sham investigation. And, there's a couple of points, and I agree with you 100%, that when the investigator starts losing his temper, and starts going from information gathering to accusatory, that's where you've got an investigator that's already reached a conclusion and now is trying to shape the testimony to fit the narrative. And that's a problem. But I do want to back up a little bit to the chief's investigation. And earlier I kind of mentioned that it isn't the way that I would recommend an investigation be done. Now, this is the chief's investigation. And the best practice is that we don't want the fire chief to be involved in investigations. Now, some departments, the chief is going to have to be. Okay, but what we want is an intermediary officer, usually a four bugle chief, whether it's, you call it an assistant chief or deputy chief. But we want someone who's going to quarterback the investigation, that has direct access to the chief, but that is able to make certain types of decisions. And one of the most important decisions when a complaint comes in is going to be who is going to investigate it. And so that's the first, I think, problem here, is that the chief of department assigned a battalion chief who had some involvement in this. And there wasn't any, you definitely don't want to have someone conducting an investigation into something that they were personally involved in.
Of course not. Of course
Okay,
not.
so that was sort of problem number one. And then the reporting went right back to the fire chief. And you really want to have that intermediate officer. And I think in law enforcement, you guys do this. It just happens because you've been doing it right all along. And you have, whoever your head of internal affairs is or professional standards, they're the ones that sort of quarterback the investigation. And then that leaves the police chief in a position where at the end of the day, somebody's got to make a decision. You're going to be demoted. You're going to get a suspension. You're going to be terminated, whatever it is. That person hasn't had direct involvement in the investigation. So they're independent in terms of objectively looking at the results of the investigation.
Well, in the job I came from, I was very frequently assigned to investigate infractions by my own guys.
Mhm.
You know, the first line supervisor is the closest to the level of execution.
Mhm.
You know, perhaps you want somebody who was there.
Not if they're going to be a witness.
Well, not necessarily be a witness,
and
but
not if they were potentially involved in the wrongdoing.
no, but what I'm getting at is you can very often put an end to things by saying, no, I was there.
Yeah,
Right. I
right,
know exactly what happened. You know,
right,
nowadays so much is on video.
right. And I would say that is a witness,
Oh, absolutely.
but that is not the
Absolutely.
investigator.
You know, and that's one of the things that I noticed in this whole process is where's the lieutenant for this firefighter or these firefighters? Where's the captain for these firefighters? What's their involvement?
Hiding.
If they're smart, if they can.
So,
As
yeah,
as a general rule, things that rose to the level of crimes went to internal affairs,
right.
but not always.
Yeah.
You know, I had one that was assigned to me where the complaint against the police officer was he raped my wife. Now that's quite an investigation to get handed.
Yeah, that is not something we want. Now, again, I think the model here is that all complaints, whether they come from outside the organization or inside the organization, go to that four bugle position. And I refer to that as the chief of professional standards. It could be the chief of ops, it could be the chief of admin, but basically whatever four bugle position gets that. Then that person looks at the allegations, just like you're discussing, and makes a decision. No, I'm going to have the captain do this one. This is a minor thing. It's, we're going to have the captain do it. Okay. Or they're going to say, this is a little bit more serious, and we're going to have internal affairs do the investigation. But what we want is consistency, because in a fire department, if you have 70 lieutenants or 70 lieutenants, 35 captains, you're going to have 100 and something ways of making that decision. You don't want officers making that decision. We need to standardize that decision making, and that's that four bugle chief's job, is to make that decision consistently. Is it going to go to the lieutenant? Is it going to go to a captain? Is it going to go to battalion chief? Is it going to go to internal affairs on a day-to-day basis in a way that's consistent, and isn't going to say, wow, for these people, the favored sons, we're going to handle it one way, and for the disfavored sons, we're going to handle it the other way, and for females, we're going to handle it this way, and for African Americans, we're going to handle it that way. Because if you don't do it in a standardized way, you open yourself up to all these allegations.
Right, but one of the things, or at least what the complaint says, is that the chief did it in the standardized way that the department,
And
assuming
I'm not
that's correct.
right, and I am not disputing that.
So if the procedure is wrong, well, then change the procedure.
Exactly. And let's face it, he may not have had any training in this area. So many people get into that, and they're trained to do it the way they've done it, the way that their predecessors have done it. They've seen it done, but they don't have any formal training in it. And when we think about what our training requirements are for firefighters, training on how to handle a disciplinary complaint is not in the top 100 things.
No, absolutely not. But it's part of police supervision.
Exactly.
You're given training in that when you go to supervisor school. That's part of it.
Well, we're not.
But the police department routinely gets more complaints than the fire department.
About 100 to 1.
But it underscores the importance, really, of documenting everything that you did. The ability for that chief to say, "Wait a minute, my documentation is right across the hall." That's worth its weight in gold.
I have a great deal of sympathy for the chief in this situation. I think, again, he did the right thing, and unfortunately, I'm not sure he's going to get what he deserves out of the court. But you take your swing and you see what happens.